Okay, so this is gonna be for, so this part is gonna be for the rest of the hypothalamus. I'm gonna do the GnRH pathway, oxytocin, and ADH stuff. So we'll do it separately. So for the GnRH, in terms of the drugs used for the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary is fairly straightforward. And then Tony is gonna later go over the rest of the hormones in later part of the pathway. So I'll just talk about the very beginning part. Okay, so let's start with hypothalamus again. All right, so hypothalamus, in this pathway regarding the sex hormones, it releases GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. Actually, all right. It releases GnRH, and then it goes to the anterior pituitary. And anterior pituitary releases two things. LH and FSH, and then that goes to their respective places. So the reason why I erased that that arrow before is that there's two different ways that you can release GnRH. You can release it in a pulsatile fashion, which is what happens in your body when you're trying to make more LH and FSH. So there's a pulsatile release, and then, or you can give drugs and then you continuously release it. So this is continuous. So continuous release actually ends up shutting down the release of LH and FSH, whereas the pulsatile release stimulates the release from the anterior pituitary. So this is pulsatile. And there are some drugs that are used typically as like a continuous fashion to kind of shut down the production of these. And those are usually used for cancers where you want to treat the prostate, breast, or endometrial cancers, so you don't want the tumor to grow in response to the estrogen and progesterone. So that would be continuous release of GnRH. So these drugs basically mimic GnRH. And there are three of them: goserelin, leuprolide, and nafarelin. Okay, so these are used to treat cancer. Prostate, breast, and endometrial. And then you can imagine you can also give something similar, or maybe the same thing, but just in a pulsatile fashion. And what's normally given in a pulsatile fashion is gonadotropin. That's usually given in a pulsatile fashion, and that's used as like assisted reproductive therapy. So right, so these are essentially very similar. The only difference is how you give it. Okay, so let's go back to the part with the cancer. When you give goserelin, leuprolide, or nafarelin, and when you initially give them these things, it actually causes extra release of LH, FSH. So only after a while, it kind of downregulates the whole pathway, and then it stops releasing the LH and FSH. So for that period of time, you want to use something else that will block the effects of the GnRH. So for that purpose, initially they're actually used along with a GnRH antagonist. So initially used with, and then aberelix. Okay, so aberelix will work on the anterior pituitary, and it would block GnRH. So it's a GnRH, should be antagonist. In that class of drugs, there's also GnRH and cetrorelix. But these two are used more for the assisted reproductive therapy, as it is here. So this is to prevent the flare. Okay, so that's about it for the hypothalamus, the GnRH pathway. So when you first, so you really use it in conjunction with if you want to stop the LH FSH production by giving them like continuous goserelin, let's say. So initially, when you first start the therapy, it's gonna make it release. So basically, when you first start the therapy, it's gonna have the same effect as gonadorelin. It's gonna just make it release more before everything down regulates. So you don't want to have the tumor suddenly grow for a period of time before you stop the production of LH FSH. So you don't want the tumor to grow initially. So that's why you use aberelix to stop that from happening. So that's an antagonist. Is that clear? Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, let me pause this.
In assisted